I'm a doctor, but probably not the one you're expecting.
So, the Eighth Doctor. What can really be said about the Eighth Doctor? Well, depending on when you got into Doctor Who, you might only know him as the television movie Doctor. You might know him as the novelization Doctor. You might know him as that Doctor that's on the Funny Audio network. That's Big Finish. You might know him as, hey, he was in Night of the Doctor, and then he drank his magic warrior juice. And yeah, you don't. He mentioned a couple names that no one quite knew. And yeah, so let's sort of start with that little bit of knowledge in mind. The Eighth Doctor is a Doctor of many different incarnations, oddly enough. Technically, there's two different actors play the Eighth Doctor. I'm only here to talk about Paul McGann. But because he existed in essentially three different mediums, there's basically three different approaches to look at the Eighth Doctor. And because I don't have that time or the money, we don't look at the audios, which is one of the reasons I don't have the money, another reason I don't have the time. But when I think of the Eighth Doctor, I think of a more ambitious approach to the Fifth Doctor. Actually, if you had to compare him to previous incarnations, he would be an interesting look at, say, the Fifth Doctor and the Fourth Doctor, which is kind of weird. So he's not as overly eccentric as the Fourth Doctor, but he's also a bit more dashing and heroic as the Fifth Doctor. And he has a bit of a certain charisma to him, a certain romance to him. Actually, the Eighth Doctor was sort of the one who brought a sense of romance to the world of Doctor Who. Hearing him talk about even his time on Gallifrey from the TV movie.
Gallifrey! Yes, this must be where I live. Now, where is that?
I've never heard of it. What do you remember?
A meteor storm. The sky above us was dancing with lights. Purple, green, brilliant yellow, yes!
You sort of get the feeling that this is someone who is well-traveled and loves the beauty of all time and space.
Places I wanted to take you. 15th broken moon of the Medusa Cascade. The lightning skies of Kotapaluni's world. Diamond coral reefs of Qatar Loco.
And he also feels like he's a fun juxtaposition to the Seventh Doctor. The Seventh Doctor is this man of all these plans and schemes and machinations, and he's playing a sort of long con with the universe. Eight sort of sees those games as kind of terrible, kind of almost morally reprehensible. The idea of playing those sort of games in mathematics with people's lives, even with something for the greater good. It's sort of the question is, there are times when the ends justify the means, but if you build, when you build an argument off of that idea, you may find that you create an entire philosophy of evil, because it gets easier and easier to manipulate the numbers. Actually, I think the Eighth Doctor said it best.
I was once a man with a master plan. I'd seek out injustices, topple governments, all in the name of a greater good. I'd started doing the maths, you see.
The maths.
This is how evil starts, with the belief that the ends justify the means. But once you start down that road, there's no turning back. What if you can save 1,000,000 lives, but you have to let 10 people die, or 100, or 100,000? Where do you stop?
But you did.
And that is him. When it comes to, say, the TV movie going forward, the TV movie itself is kind of bad. I don't think it quite understands Doctor Who. I don't think it quite understands the Doctor, because this wasn't really made in the UK. It wasn't, I think it was like made in Canada. Was it Canada or the US? One of those two. We botched it. Let's just say it. We botched it. They should have stayed in the UK, stayed across the pond, and it would have probably been better. It was effectively a chance to revitalize the franchise, because at the end of the Seventh Doctor's era, well, it was over. Like, the show was canceled, it was not renewed. There we go. This was a chance to bring it back, and it ultimately failed. Not because of anything Paul McGann did. Paul McGann, like Colin Baker, really just did his job, worked the scripts as best he could. The difference is, though, is that where Colin's script in his era is defined by this.
We all know the fate of alien spies!
I think the Eighth Doctor is really defined by mostly this scene here that everyone kind of hates.
I'm half human. On my mother's side.
Yeah, this was a weird mystery drop. I don't know anyone that really likes it. I think people don't like sort of definitive answers. And we're also hearing this from an amnesiac, so whatever. But with that as a template, I think the Eighth Doctor sets himself up fine. Again, this sort of romantic of all time and space, but also this sort of, I want to say, sort of tries to personify the Doctor in a lot of ways. Because the Eighth Doctor, in a lot of ways, was sort of the last of the classic era Doctors, but he was also, interesting enough, part of the New Who era. The Eighth Doctor was the first one to actually just start making out with a companion, and that's been carrying on ever since then. Really, it's just been all over Doctor Who since then. Except like, and he starts off traveling alone, and I don't think that's something Doctor Who's ever done before, because the Seventh Doctor was with Mel, the Sixth Doctor was with Perry, 5 was with Adric, Nyssa, and Tegan. Wasn't as many as I thought. The Fourth Doctor was with Sarah Jane and the Brigadier. Technically Pertwee, but Pertwee just happened to also be picked up with Unit right then and there. The Second Doctor didn't. Yeah, but when you think about how he starts off, especially from the audios, his first episode is a lot like the episode Rose from New Who. You know, he's this mysterious traveler who sees something strange going on, and he happens to meet a companion. And that really is how Big Finish, in my mind, sort of paced out their sort of Eighth Doctor eras. There's the Charlie era, one of my favorites. There's the Lucy Miller era, nice little gem there, which was, I think, supposed to be more in line with the feeling of New Who. Then there is the Dark Eyes era, the Molly O'Sullivan era. But then I don't think it's quite an era in the same way. Then you have Ravenous, Doom Coalition, the Liv and Helen era, which is what that is. And then you have, at the same time, oddly enough, sort of the same time, depending on how you view time, the Time War era, which is really great. Well, that'll be the pinnacle of it for me. But when I think of the Eighth Doctor, I think of the idea that he's sort of carrying all the experience of every Doctor that came before him. So he really is sort of like the most powerful of the classic era Doctors because of that. So he does have a sort of jovial approach to it, but he also has this certain love of travel, which is not unique to him. It's true of pretty much all the Doctors. I think the only Doctors that isn't true of is the Third Doctor, because he was stuck on Earth with nowhere to go, and the Seventh Doctor because he had his clandestine time travel affairs, which gets more and more extreme and ridiculous as it goes on. But the Eighth Doctor is, I think that romance sort of sums it up to him, because there's a certain beauty to the universe, which he likes to present, but there's also the certain tragedy to it. Because he's got, when you think of the Doctor with his two hearts, I think the problem is they're going to break. The death of Adric, the loss of Ace, the loss of Perry. For the Eighth Doctor, these are a bit more tragic in more ways than one. The Charlie era ends with him, not being able to be with Charlie anymore. And those two were pretty close. Like 8 and Charlie, to me, is like a better version of 10 and Rose. Lucy Miller will sadly lose her life. Molly O'Sullivan has its own sort of tragedy. Actually, the tragedy is more cause of something else. But we'll see. But it sort of goes on from there, and we'll sort of see the Eighth Doctor, sort of be defined in a lot of ways by death and the loss of friends and family closest to him. He sort of wears all that on his sleeve. There's some stories where it feels like the Eighth Doctor is on a self-destructive streak, and he does sort of take this sort of moral stance on things. Like, certain things are just wrong regardless. Again, if you have someone who points out the idea of the ends justify the means is not always the right course of action. On a lighter note, it should be noted that the Eighth Doctor does a lot of stuff that was really only exclusive to other incarnations from a TV standpoint. For example, the monk. The Eighth Doctor will meet the monk. The monk had primarily been, to my knowledge, I could be wrong, from a TV standpoint at least, was an adversary of the First Doctor. He gets to duke it out with Morbius. which is, of course, a Fourth Doctor story. There's, of course, lots of stories on Gallifrey. Like, most of the Eighth Doctor's audios at some point will say, and here he is on Gallifrey, because the Time Lords. And I think that's interesting because we know where the Eighth Doctor story ends up, at the Time War, and that's an interesting story in itself. So Big Finish, for the longest time, had sort of had the idea in their head, okay, we'll do the story of the Eighth Doctor in the Time War. He was the guy that did the thing, and then, who, is that John Hurt? Oh, that's John Hurt. And he was what? The Doctor in the Time War. Oh, that's great. That is just great. That is, we gotta course correct. So the problem is, though, they really built it up. We saw the new jacket the Eighth Doctor had, which was a stark difference from his original costume, but also was a fun way to set up him regenerating into his ninth incarnation, the Ninth Doctor. So what did that really mean for the Eighth Doctor? Well, it meant that we had to sort of change course. So he's in the Time War. He's deciding not to fight the Time War, and then he'll fight in the Time War when he drinks the Magic Warrior juice, which also, when he drinks that juice, he canonizes most of Big Finish, or at least some of my favorite stuff, so I was like, you know what, it counts.
Charlie, Carey's, Lucy, Tamsin, Molly, friends, companions I've known, I salute you.
The problem with the Eighth Doctor in the Time War is his sort of most as like, I will not fight. And you can sort of appreciate that decision. I think it's in line with the Doctor to not fight in a war, but he's not doing anything to really help either. And he sees enough that you kind of wonder why he isn't actually trying to do something. So, for example, in the Sontaran ordeal, which is from Classic Doctor's New Monsters, we find out that time distortions affect the planet Drakis. So Drakis' history is permanently changed. And as it's pointed out, Drakis will never know peace. Even when they've achieved peace in the story, the Doctor points out this peace will not last because their timeline has been irreparably damaged. I didn't know what word to say. Damaged by the Time War. And they can never leave. They don't even notice that their timeline has changed because they're part of it. So that's the reason. And the Doctor's even begging the Time Lords not to bring their Time War here, but it ends up there. In Lies in Ruins, in the audio set Legacy of Time. Was it Legacy of Time? I think it was. The story Lies in Ruins, where the Doctor arrives on a destroyed Gallifrey, implying that there's a continuity or a universe or timeline where the Time Lords lose the Time War, or they win and their destruction is the cost or whatnot. And he still doesn't seem interested in fighting in the Time War. So when he sees these negative repercussions of the Time War, or the negative end result of it, he still doesn't want to fight. And then, of course, we have something like, say, in the Time War story, the character Bliss. Bliss is an orphan of the Time War. The events of that war have led to it that she doesn't actually belong in the universe. Like, she's essentially been removed from the continuity of the universe to an extent. Like, she has no history on her home planet. So the Doctor still doesn't see it as a reason to fight the Time War. It's like, well, I have to help Bliss. Well, you could also stop this from happening to other people. And at the same time, though, because of who the enemy is, the Daleks, one would think the Doctor wouldn't have a problem fighting against a group of people, or the species, that has pretty much said anything that's not us is a beast of burden that at best is a good labor force. That's it. So, no, he wouldn't. Which is weird because, again, the Doctor's best friend, one of the Doctor's best friends, is Winston Churchill. All right? And I think if Winston ever heard about the Doctor, not wanting to fight the Daleks, considering everything, you would probably get this...
When will the lesson be learned? When will the lesson be learned? How many more dictators must be wooed, appeased, good God, given him mixed privileges, before we learn? You cannot reason with a tiger when your head is in its mouth!
because it doesn't make sense. Now, the Eighth Doctor's pointed out that, he doesn't know how to approach something like a time war, a war waged through all of time and space. It's complicated. This isn't the incarnation for this. Most people have agreed that the Seventh Doctor is the one best suited for this, willing to make those big plays. The Eighth Doctor is already the Ninth Doctor in this scene here.
Coward. Any day.
He's not able to do it, which is why he has to make this big sacrifice in Night of the Doctor. Overall, I think what makes the Eighth Doctor a great character is the concept of death, oddly enough. And the romance that comes with it. Because he meets his companions and they break his heart. They do. Whether it be Charlotte, whether it be Lucy, whether it be even his own great-grandson, the people he meets and loses affect him, and I think they sort of both strengthen him and take away his will to fight because of it. Because he'll go so hard and so far for them that at the end of it, even win or lose, he feels so tired at the end of it. At least that's how I think. I don't know. The Eighth Doctor is still fun. I love his first costume. His second one grew on me. Third one is really fun. I think that's a first where all the costumes work out for me. Maybe. We'll have to go back and look. So what are some great Eighth Doctor stories? Well, from an audio standpoint, I definitely recommend Storm Warning. It's his first one. And it really, like I said before, it really reads or listens like the episode Rose. 8 and Charlie have a great dynamic. It is beautiful in my opinion. Most of Lucy Miller's stuff I think is fun. Human Resources is a great Cyberman story. Blood of the Daleks is alright. I love Dark Eyes. Molly O'Sullivan is a fantastic character. I think she is a great approach to a Donna Noble-esque character because she's very argumentative with the Doctor. Both Lucy and Molly are argumentative with the Doctor, and I think that helps. Those are really fun companions. Dark Eyes also introduces the McQueen's Master, which is one of my favorite incarnations of the Master. Him and Jacoby are really all I need. I just need him and Jacoby. What else does a man need but these two brilliant actors being the Master? Chimes of Midnight is a Charlie era story. Great, depressing, nothing like Suicide at Christmas. Neverland is, I think, one of the best Time Lord stories. Lots of great lore there. Sort of a Peter Pan-esque story, followed up by Zagreus, which is a 4-hour audio. So if you're new to audios, stay away from it. Actually, it's the culmination of a story, so definitely stay away from it. Just go from Storm Warning and follow the straight line to Neverland and to Zagreus. You'll be fine. The Live in Helen era is honestly not to my taste. To be fair, there's some great stories, like the Krampus story is brilliant. I loved it. We brought Krampus in. Doom Coalition is fine. There's some fun stuff there, but that really is sort of slowly leading into the Time War, and I felt like it's going a bit too long. And then we've got the whole Stranded thing. I just can't. And of course, I love the Time War, despite my critique of it and what it did to the Eighth Doctor's character. I don't blame Big Finish for this. It just sort of happened. You can't, what did the Queen of Thorns say? Once you milk the cow, there's no putting it back up her udder. It happens. You can't do it. There's some great stories. There's a great Time Lord called the 11 or the 12 in the case of the Time War. We'll also see the Eighth Doctor meet Jacoby's Master, which is always fun. We'll meet the ultimate Davros. And we'll sort of see the Time Lords enter an interesting era. And I think it sort of pointed out why the Eighth Doctor was against the idea of the Time War. What it does to the Time Lords is, I think, a story you can only appreciate if you listen to the Gallifrey series, in my opinion. Ultimately, the Eighth Doctor, I think, is a great bridge from classic to new Who. There's a little bit of everything for everyone. And of course, any person who can do this...
Was that supposed to frighten me, Thal? I've seen entire species destroyed, civilizations left in ruins. I've witnessed solar systems vanish in the twinkling of an eye. I've seen things that would freeze your blood. So don't threaten me. Don't ever threaten me.
Can definitely believed to be the ones who will later do
No second chances. I'm that sort of a man.
Good men don't need rules.
today is not the day to find out why I have so many.
I'll do my best. But I strongly advise you to keep out of my way. You'll find that it's a very small universe when I'm angry with you.
So yeah, anyway, with that in mind, let's bring this video close here. If you're new to the Bucket Think Tank, feel free to like, comment, share, subscribe. Check out some other videos, and I'll catch you all later. This is Bucket Think Tank signing off. Thanks for watching. As always, may your fandom serve you well.